Thank you so much for coming in.
It's good to be here.
So this is a beautiful book and a wide-ranging book. I like to focus on the chapters about science and the media. Why has bringing science and your love of science to the general public been so important to you?
Well, when I came back to Canada, I'd lived in the States for 8 years. And I was really a hotshot geneticist, and I wanted to make my name. And I was stunned to find the level of support for science in Canada. This is back in 1963. It was like nothing. So the guys I graduated with from a university in the States were getting grants, research grants of $60,000, $70,000. My first grant was for $3,600. And, I was really stunned at this, and I realized that Canadians really don't understand why science is important, why it should be supported. Mm-hmm. So I started from a very self-interested point of view. I said, science, we better tell people about the role of science in their lives. And when I was offered a chance to do television, I took it.
And you had a faith that people have a natural interest in science.
Well, I think science is exciting, and certainly when the nature of things, their bread and butter is nature. I've always said you can get people to watch the sex life of an oyster if you show the proper picture. People love nature. There's a natural affinity, and people love exploring ideas, in the cosmos or to the tiniest part. It's just that it's laden with a lot of, you got to know some math in order to do science. And people have a certain kind of barrier against really getting into it. So that was a challenge in going into television.
Breaking down those barriers.
Breaking down the barriers, making it explainable. My dad only went to high school, finished high school, but he was my biggest fan and my biggest critic. He'd watch everything I did. And I'd go and see him and he'd say, "What the hell were you trying?" I didn't understand a damn thing. I said, "I'm your dad. I love you. But if I can't understand it, how do you expect the general public out there?" So he was just constantly hammering at me to make it accessible to people like him.
Well, I was surprised to see you as a longtime broadcaster and TV host write that TV is not a great medium for science education. Why not?
Well, I think there are things that you can do with television that are fantastic. The visuals, of course, and you've got all kinds of new techniques of drones and endoscopy that you can, microscopy and time lapse. There are a lot of things you can do that are fantastic. But in terms of real science and nature, I always decried cyberspace. Everybody is, cyber world, and we can have these goggles and you can have this cyber world. And the problem with that is, to me, the cyber world can be better than the real world. And people can get locked into it. For example, you can have a gunfight with someone in a cyber world, lose, and live to fight again. You can have a car race with all the heart-thumping, adrenaline-charged experience, crash, and walk away. Or you can have the kinkiest sex and not worry about STDs or getting caught. And so people could get sucked into that world because it's better than reality. But I always thought, no, our films are different. We're going to show people the real world and get them to fall in love with it. But I realized over time that we're in the same business of using the cyber world, because we'll send a guy down to the Amazon or the Arctic, and he's sitting in a blind for months trying to get the best shot, of a polar bear emerging from its den or parrots flying. But what we do then back in the editing room is take months of video, edit it into one sensational shot after another.
Yeah.
And what do you see? You see nature hopped up on steroids, but nothing like the real world, because the one thing nature needs is time. And we have become a very impatient creature. We don't want to wait around. We want it now. We want all that stuff, and we don't have. Nature needs time to reveal her secrets. And we've cut time out. And I think that's a tremendous loss in the way that we look at the world. We're just too damned anxious.
It's a terrible incongruence, isn't it? Because technology has changed, that's sped up, but nature has not changed. Nature still requires time.
Exactly. And yet what we think we can do is hop nature up. We can grow the fastest growing trees, and we can get rid of the lignin in them that costs so much money. And we're just going to grow these trees, and we'll have a rotation of crops of 30 years. Well, this is baloney. It just nature isn't that way. You've got to take your time. But with all the genetic modification now, we think that we can create the organisms to serve us the way we want. That ain't the way it goes in the real world, I think. And now we've created tremendous problems with, for example, too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from burning fossil fuels. So what's our attitude? Oh, well, we can't stop burning fossil fuels. It's too critical for the economy. So geoengineering. We'll go into space and put umbrellas up in space and shield the Earth, or spray aerosols that will reflect light. I mean, all this baloney. So we think we've kind of taken over the planet and created enormous problems. And we think technology is going to keep getting us out of the problems technology created in the first place. It just can't keep going on.
And you observed a microcosm of this, as you've been explaining, with television and our appetite for more and more information growing. Despite noticing this, you stayed with the nature of things. Why?
Okay, well, I think, the reality is that majority of people watching television, they just do it for entertainment or passing the time. But I still believe that there is a place for good information, and that a small percentage of the viewers could have one of those eureka moments. Oh my God, we've got to do something. So I justify it not on I thought I was going to present wonderful programs and people would fall in love with nature and all this stuff. Well, I don't believe that anymore. I know the vast majority of people, they don't remember what was on one show to another. But a small percentage go, hey, he's right, I want to do something. And that's what continues to justify using the medium. I much prefer radio.
I did enjoy reading that. I did enjoy reading that.
I loved Quirks and Quarks when I started that. And I just think it's such a warm, natural, spontaneous medium. Television is a creation. It's very, very artificial. From the pieces I do on air, they'll say, Suzuki, you got 30 seconds. Now you got to fill that 30 seconds, and so you've got to look to camera. I have to comb my hair and kind of look presentable. It's a very different medium.
It's interesting seeing how many young people are gravitating towards radio too and podcasting because of precisely that intimacy.
Good.
And warmth. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that.
You also have an interesting chapter in this new book about the role of celebrities in the conversation about science. A lot of people criticize celebrity activists, but you defend their right to speak out.
Oh,
why?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Paul Watson, who started the Sea Shepherd, I remember when he got Bo Derek, who was a famous actress, to come to one of his events, and all of the reporters were outraged that he was using a sex image to support his cause. So they said, what the hell is this actress doing here? Talking about saving whales and seals. And he said, yeah, that's why you guys have come. But you've come, right? So he was shameless in terms of exploiting the celebrities. And Neil Young was the same way. When I toured with him, people were criticizing him, saying, well, you're famous and you're just attracting people. He said, yeah, that's fine. You're here. But he was much more informed. And I admire people who are willing to use their celebrity status, but in an informed way to support certain causes.
But what about when celebrities aren't informed? I think of Jenny McCarthy, for example, and her kind of campaign spread some unfounded fears around vaccines.
Yes. Huge legacy that she has, because the impact of that, that was autism and vaccination,
I think so, yeah.
right? And that was based on one paper that turned out to be fraudulent. But the harm of that is just astounding. And we see it right now in terms of the measles outbreak here. I did not realize how many anti-vaxxers there are. And that really, I grieve at that, because to me, one of the great innovations or discoveries in medicine was vaccination. It is using the body's own mechanisms to produce antibodies against an invading virus, and to come out in the anti-vaccine way on so little information, I think was very, very bad. And as you say, her celebrity status ensured that a lot of people followed what she said. So, one of the things I keep telling people, you got to be media savvy. Right now we have access to more information than any generation has ever had. But most of it is pornography or selling stuff. It's junk. And so people, if you want to believe any wild idea, you want to believe the earth is flat, guess what? There's a flat earth society. You want to believe there are Bermuda triangles where planes are crashing, there's a website. You can find anything. You have to be very, very critical and ask the source of your material. And I regret someone like Jenny McCarthy who's done that, because she was so poorly informed.
You do, though, hold up Neil Young, as you mentioned, as an example of a celebrity that uses their power for good. Why did you choose to support his oil sands project?
Well, we're trying to raise a lot of attention to that issue. And the reality is that environmental groups can do so much. But when you have a person of his stature coming in and saying, honor the treaties, that ramps up the awareness enormously. And when he asked me to go on the tour with him, I was just honored. It was terrific. And the reality is, he really did raise, I think, the level of consciousness. And when we were actually in Alberta, they took a poll in Edmonton. 77% of the people polled supported Neil, and the purpose of the tour, which was to say, Canada signed treaties with the First Nations. Honor the treaties. How can you think that's radical? He's just saying, we've made promises that we're breaking, and let's honor what we've made the commitments to do. So it was, to me, it was a great event. Now, in a way, I had one of these problems with the use of celebrity. I have this organization where we spend half of all of our money on communication, trying to communicate to the public about the environment. And we fight like mad trying to get any interest in the media.
Yeah.
So we did a program called Fallacies, P-H-A-L-L. It was on the penis. And when we were doing the publicity, one of the publicists threw me a fig leaf and said, hey, you're going on a shoot up in Georgian Bay. Get a picture of yourself wearing this. So I posed for this picture with just a fig leaf. That thing went absolutely nuts across the country. And I thought, this is crazy. Just because a guy takes off his clothes, that's more important than all the stuff we're doing about the environment. That's a statement about the media and publicity.
Does that make you laugh, or does that just drive you insane?
Well, it makes me laugh. I think some people seem to be surprised that even when you're an old man, you can be in reasonable shape.
Yeah.
But I wish the media would focus on some serious issues with the same kind of interest.
What about your own celebrity? How do you decide how to use that power?
Well, this is a thing for years, it was just my wife and I. People would ask, would you come and help us stop logging in this forest or whatever? So we'd go, oh, yeah, okay. And it was kind of helter-skelter. Now we've formed an organization which does a lot of the stuff that we used to do. And so I throw my support into that and deciding on what the priorities should be.
Was there ever a tension between your roles as a host, let's say, versus your passions as an activist?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a very good question. Many, many years ago, before the tar sands were famous, there was some, I can't even remember the case. Anyway, the NDP came out with a statement about a need to relook at our relationship with the energy sector in Alberta. Anyway, and I signed it. Well, the CBC, this has got to be 30 years ago, CBC went nuts because they were scared stiff that someone in Ottawa would come down on them. And so I was so mad when they told me I couldn't do this that I said I was going to quit. And I was persuaded not to quit, but they said Suzuki's on a leave of absence so he can do political activities.
Interesting.
I have never done anything where I have felt, yikes, why am I hosting a program like this? Although there was a recent one. I'd rather not talk about that. We've done a number of shows where we've had to bring in lawyers to make sure that we weren't doing anything we could be sued for.
Number of shows on the CBC or?
This is on the nature of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Episodes.
And years ago, we did a 2-hour special called Voices in the Forest. And it was about logging. And one of the big banks came out because the bank CEO was on the board of Forest Industry and came out demanding CBC not run the show, even before they'd even seen it, because they knew that it was going to take a big hit at the forest industry. So we've had a number of issues we've raised that have been controversial, but not because I felt, I shouldn't be doing this, or that we were misrepresenting, but because the industries, pharmaceutical, nuclear, forestry, they were always threatened by what we were saying. This is why we have the CBC, it seems to me. Rex Murphy is on all the time. We know where Rex is coming from, and fair enough. But CBC is the one vehicle, it seems to me, that can provide a broad representation of views.
Because it has the explicit mandate of representing the public interest.
Yes, absolutely.
What about making decisions around speaking outside of your own specific area of scientific expertise?
Well, this gets to be very, very tricky. As far as I'm concerned, I've spoken before Shell, for example. I'll take an invitation and money if they want to pay me, as long as they don't tell me what I'm going to say. And I want to reach out. I want to talk to groups representing an area that I'm fighting against, because. But where it gets tricky, of course, is where you're speaking to a group on behalf of a group, and then you have objectivity in the reporting that you're supposed to do on television or on radio. That's a really difficult thing. I think the important thing is to make sure it's explicit what your relationship is with those other organizations.
You wrote a really poignant letter to your grandson Tamo when he was arrested on Burnaby Mountain this fall. What would you say to other young activists who don't have the support of their parents or grandparents?
Well, gee, I one of the things I say is that the two most important people in your life are your parents. And if you can't convince your parents, how are you ever going to be able to explain the situation to the rest of the world? So the challenge really is to get mom and dad and grandma and grandpa on side. That's the role of young people, because right now young people can't vote. They're not on the political agenda, and there are a lot of things where they need politicians to make decisions on their behalf. Right now, can you imagine a politician that goes and says, look, I'm going to have to make a commitment for $100 million a year on behalf of future generations? I mean, you'd laugh them out of the job.
Yeah.
Because they're not on the political agenda. And I believe that young people have really got to recruit mom and dad. They're the ones that can go to the politicians or the business people and say something. So that's the challenge for younger people. Make sure mom and dad understand.
When you think of the
But
state...
having said that,
yeah.
their future is what's at stake now. I don't think it's an accident that young people now, they may not be voting because they don't feel politicians are concerned about them, but they're very active on issues like climate change because it's their whole future that's at stake. And I think you're going to see more and more young people, like my grandson, that are going to go out and get arrested because they're fighting for something different that politicians and business people aren't focused on right now. Their future is what's at stake.
Well, it's a beautiful book, beautiful words for your grandkids and also for another generation of activists. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.